Hey friends, welcome back. I'm super excited to have the incredible Lindsay Vine with me here today. A lot of you probably know her already. She's over in Vancouver, Canada, and always great. You know how excited I get when I have a fellow Canadian on the channel. So Lindsay, like probably you and most people watching, unfortunately had to put in her time and do her stint with chronic illness. She had about 7 years with chronic fatigue syndrome, or ME/CFS, and tried a bunch of different online programs and eventually found a combination of things that worked for her and allowed her to fully recover, which is incredible. And now she is a CFS programs navigator, which is such a vital thing that we need right now. So she helps people who are facing conditions like ME/CFS, long COVID, fibromyalgia, and all of that to figure out what program could be best for them. And stick around to the end because I'm super excited about this, because her and my really good friend Liz Carlson worked really hard to put together a CFS recovery programs guide. And in this, they interviewed every single founder, creator of the programs, and also interviewed a bunch of people who actually did the programs. So she has more insight than probably just about anybody out there about all of these programs that exist. So we're going to dive into all of that today. So Lindsay, thank you so much for being here today. I'm excited.
Thank you so much, Raelan. I can't tell you how excited I am to be. I have to tell you, it's one thing that, especially in the last few years, it's been a visualization of mine to be able to do my recovery interview with Raelan. So it's kind of it's out of this world to be here right now.
Oh, that is so amazing. I'm so excited that you're here. I'm so happy for you. And I did similar visualizations with my own recovery. So I totally get it. It's just a nice, I did it.
Yeah, it's so nice to be here.
And you interviewed me as well for your CFS recovery programs guide. And at the end of my interview, you asked me a wacky question. So I'm going to finish off this interview asking you the same wacky question. So yeah, we'll see what you say.
Yeah, for people who wanted to check out my Instagram, CFS programs_navigator.com, I interviewed so far about 12 or 13 of the program creators just to get mini interviews about their programs. So that's where I have Raelan.
That is super helpful. I think a good place to start, obviously, here is to hear about your story with this. So how did this all go for you?
Well, so it started literally right after I handed in my master's thesis. It was like, hand in the thesis, have that unbelievable relief of being done, and waking up the next morning with strep throat, and I couldn't get rid of the strep throat. More antibiotics, and then it was a few weeks after that all my energy, I just felt it drain out of my body, and it was like my body was done, after those 2 years of stress, and of course we look back on how many factors were a cause of it, but that would be where it all started.
So you handed in your master's, you got sick, and then what happened? You just never got better, or what did that look like?
No, so actually it was a lot of ups and downs for me. I have the kind of version of CFS where I was really sick for about 4 or 5 months while I was working, and then I finished a contract. I had a summer off. I started to feel better and get better and better. And of course, as we do in our society, it was like, got to get back to working, right? So I got a new job. I definitely wasn't fully recovered, but I was much better than I had been. And within 2 weeks of that, a huge crash again. My body was just not having it. And that's about the time that I started going to doctors, and I got a diagnosis for ME/CFS. And I think that was, obviously we need to get a diagnosis to understand what's happening in our body, but also a negative because it was like, okay, now I have a disease, like I have something they're telling me there's no cure. And from there, it was a lot of desperation and a lot of fear for quite a while after that, of figuring out what the heck I was going to do about this illness that I had.
Had you heard of this diagnosis before you got it?
No, actually, someone earlier in that year had been like, oh, I don't think it's ME/CFS. You'll get better. It was a doctor that said that. And it was actually very helpful that she had said that, because I didn't, think about it too much, because she was like, oh, I don't think you have that. It's so interesting, the psychological aspect of that, because then when I crashed again, it was like, figured, oh my gosh, I think I do have this,
So I know things did get quite bad for you before they got better. So what did that look like? Kind of what was the worst of this for you?
So after that, I kept working while I was sick for about a year in this new job, because I had just started a new job. So even though I was going home and going straight to bed every day, they were very accommodating. I was resting on my breaks, but was I really resting? I was stressing, let's be honest. And it was like a year of going to doctors, going to appointments, trying to figure out what it was. But I finished that contract and I realized I needed to stop working. And at that point, I decided to move to a small island off the coast of Vancouver. I live in Vancouver now, but there's a bunch of little islands. My idea was, I'm going to heal in nature. So for me, this was going to be a great healing journey in nature. And I had a friend whose parents had a cabin on this small island, so they let me stay there. It was all going to be wonderful and healing. The problem with that is that it's extremely isolating when you do that. First few weeks, wonderful. I'm there with nature and animals, seeing whales. But then you start to realize how loneliness is actually quite a large part of this illness. And it's why I often call this illness a mind F word. I won't say it on your channel. But we isolate ourselves so often because of our sensitivities. I had the sensitivity to light and noise, and I couldn't socialize for very long. So we isolate ourselves. But it is a very core human need to be with other people. And by isolating myself on this island, I ended up just getting worse and worse and worse. And there were ups and downs for sure. I spent a few winters there in Thailand, where I'd get better and better in the sun and healing environment. Somewhere in there I did DNRS too, the brain retraining program. So I had stints where I'd get better. But then I came back to the island after these stints and I'd crash again, like really, really hard. So the worst crash I ever had was after I had done DNRS. So I had done brain retraining. I had been telling myself, I'm going to be totally better in 6 months. And some people listening might relate to this, where they have done this and they think that they're on the road to recovery. They've done it. They're there. I got myself up to about 8,000 steps. I thought I was home free. And I got back to the island after the winter in Thailand, where I was practicing that. And I can't tell you the exact factor. I was trying to wean off a drug, and there may have been mold. There's a lot of possibilities, but for some reason, bam, I was back to bedbound, like just completely out of breath trying to get to the bathroom. I always would get this like swollen sensation in my neck. Some people might relate to that. And just that super out of breath. And I think that feeling after you're so sure that you've done it, and then having a huge setback like that, the mental repercussions of that are significant. Like, I was depressed. It got really, really bad after that because I was so sure that I was done with this. And it was actually a few years after that of staying on the island and being isolated, and it getting just worse and worse and worse. The worse it got was definitely the point of where I was just ready to end it all. I was at the point where I had these beautiful cliffs and I was ready to jump off of them because I had cans of tuna piled up beside my bed so I didn't have to get to the kitchen because I was too tired. And I'd be peeing in a Tupperware container, like a big Tupperware, and I would just go to the bathroom once a day to empty that and like stop at the kitchen for water. and eat my tuna cans beside my bed. Like, it's so sad. I'm living alone and being pretty much bedbound. I was at my wit's end, truly.
Oh my goodness, what a nightmare.
Yeah.
Uh,
It's
I am
really
so
insane
sorry you
how
had to
bad
go
it can
through.
get. And it was also during COVID, so my friends couldn't come visit me really. And people didn't really know how I was suffering because, as with most of us, I was not the personality type to be like asking for help. I was like, I'm going to fix myself, you know?
Yeah. Oh, it just everything you're saying, your story, it brings up so many memories for me and for people watching, I'm sure. I appreciate you sharing that. We talked about the importance of, we share these interviews, and when we come back when we're recovered and we're all happy and smiley and bubbly, and it can seem like it really wasn't that bad. And, for those of you watching, it could feel like, I don't relate to this. I don't think that person really went through anything that bad.
Absolutely. I remember thinking that all the time, even when
Yeah.
I'd watch your interviews. I'm like, were they really as bad as I am?
Yeah.
And yeah.
Yeah, no, I remember 2 distinct points in my journey where I was so hopeless. I thought about completely giving up and ending it all. Like, it gets really bad. And I remember those, I'd forgotten about this until you brought this up, but I would give a timeline for something new that I was trying, say 6 months or whatever, and I do the math forward, and I think, okay, by Christmas, think where I'm going to be by Christmas. Like, I'm going to be in a whole new place. And then Christmas comes and I'm not better, or maybe I'm even worse. And just the depression can come on so hard, and it can just start to feel like, what am I even doing? I'm not getting anywhere. I'm not getting anywhere. It can feel so hopeless. So how did you get from that place, or how did you find the hope and the sort of will to keep going and not give up through all of this?
Well, there's kind of 2 sides to that. There's like the acute, what did I do in the moment when it was getting so bad, that I'll talk about. And then there's the long term, because as we know, none of this happens quickly, except in those rare cases you hear about. But acutely, when I was like at my bottom of the bottom, and what I suggest to people is, first of all, call someone. Even though you feel so terrible, talk to someone. Like, keeping it all inside, bottled up, the bottling up and up and up, that's really, really, really what creates the potential for disaster. We need to get it out. We need to let people know how we feel. And someone who's empathetic and compassionate, of course. Don't go to someone who doesn't understand. The other thing I did, I think there was like 2 days straight there where, I'm in bed and too sensitive for everything. So all I was doing was listing everything I'm grateful for, like my friends and my family and all the things that I'm grateful for, just over and over, to keep my head out of going to those really, really scary places. Gratefulness is it's very hard sometimes, but I think it can be a key to recovery if we focus on it, especially in those times. Definitely change of environment. Obviously, a lot of us are bedbound, but I was managed a few times to pull myself outside, like even if I was just crawling, and sit outside and have the wind in my face. And change of environment is huge in those kinds of situations. If you can, if you are bedbound and someone can take you outside and there's sun or something, that could be a huge change also for your mental state. So those are just a few acute things I'd recommend if you're really in your depths. In terms of how I got to where I am today, I wish there was just one thing. I wish it was just like an easy answer for people. But it's definitely like a staircase of a bunch of little things adding up over time. I ended up starting CFS Health with Toby Morrison. That was one thing. And I actually would say that the bigger step for me was asking my stepdad for the money to start CFS Health. Because I'm very aware that these programs are often expensive. And some of us are not able to afford these things, so we don't see an opportunity for change. But often if we ask for help, people are willing to help us. So I told him, this is what I think I need. Could you please pay for this? And he was happy to do it. So that was definitely a turning point for me. A lot of the information in that program wasn't even stuff I needed because I had already learned through my 5 years up till then a lot of information already about pacing and lifestyle. But thing about that program that really helped me was the connections I made. I met my podcast partner, Stu, and I made incredible friends through that program that really, from there on, I was able to work with in recovery. So making those connections with people who've been through similar things is really, really vital, even if it is through some kind of online forum. Another thing I did about that time was, I'm so grateful every day to my friends, because they literally had an intervention to get me off that island. They knew that I was suffering there. I didn't see how I could afford to live in Vancouver again, but they found me an apartment in Vancouver. They literally came with cars to move my stuff and clean my apartment and do everything for me. And they moved me to Vancouver. And ever since I moved back here and have been surrounded by people who love me, it's been an upward trend. So sometimes a change in environment, as I've said before, is huge, but also just like letting people help you, because that was a big game changer for me.
I was just thinking when you were talking, when I talk about my own recovery story, I share the things that I felt were most impactful for my recovery. And I still stand behind those things, but I almost never mentioned my husband, Jeffrey. When I started to recover, it was when I moved in with him, and I had been really lonely for years before that. And not only that, he was incredibly supportive and helped me a lot with my recovery. So I had that sort of, love and companionship in my life. And then I also had all of this support and help that I didn't have, and not giving him any credit where it's due. I'm like, I did it all. It was all me. Here are the things I did. But it's massive. It's really massive. Such a big thing.
Yeah, and when I'm working with clients, I'm always trying to investigate that. Like, do you feel lonely? Because loneliness is a huge factor in mental health. Recent studies have shown people who feel lonely live a lot less long than people who feel like they're connected to other people. And mental health and physical health are so much more connected than our medical system gives it credit. So if you're feeling lonely, it's very difficult for your body to feel safe enough to recover. So for me, getting back here was a huge step. And like I said, that friendship I'd made with Stuart, who together we started creating a few months after that, we started Post-Viral Podcast, because we had learned so many things through CFS Health and through our journeys. We felt like everybody deserved to have all this knowledge at their fingertips without having to pay for it. So we started a podcast together, even though we were still quite sick at the time. I mean, he still has his struggles at this point, and it's been a lot of up and downs. But doing that podcast and having that as a purpose and a goal was also very, very useful to recovery, I think, having something to focus on outside of yourself.
It's such a great podcast you guys do. It's linked in the video description for those of you watching. I really recommend checking it out. I know I say this a lot, but it is absolutely excellent. Everybody raves about it. So great work on that, especially getting to that before you guys were, fully recovered.
Yeah, I think it's interesting how many messages we get. It's not so much about the tips and the resources themselves that people are connected to, even though that was our main purpose, was to get these out. People just always are messaging us and be like, oh, it makes me feel so connected, and like I have a friend, and they feel like they're not alone in the journey. And it's so amazing, because podcasts have actually been a big part of my recovery as well, finding comedy podcasts and podcasters that I related with, because screens have been really difficult for me. So to provide that to other people is amazing. And season 2 is just starting. Stu's not going to be as much a part of it. He's still helping me with editing. But the first season, we covered these different areas of recovery that helped us, and what we learned in these different areas, like brain retraining, diet, pacing, all the different areas you hear about. And then season 2, what I wanted to do is interview experts in those areas to try and get even deeper in terms of the knowledge that I can get out to people. So that's just starting up this week, actually.
And I think that transitions us well into, for your own recovery journey, what were those key things that ended up helping you finally to get better?
Actually, what I'll say is really there's 4 areas of recovery, which Liz and I cover in our guide. That's how we categorize the different programs. And for me, I would say it was addressing these 4 areas and being consistent with these 4 areas that was helpful. So the 4 areas of recovery, the first one is lifestyle. So that includes pacing and diet and setting boundaries and all the things around the way you're living that could be changed in order to help your recovery. The second area of recovery is brain retraining. So it can also be called mindset work. You don't necessarily have to do a brain retraining program, but it's really truly about changing which neural pathways you're using in order to make yourself truly into a person who believes they're going to recover, who sees the hope, sees the gratitude. All the little changes in our brain are surprisingly impactful on our body. The third area is somatics. So that's about kind of the opposite of brain retraining, but a bottom-up approach where we connect with our body, which is so important. For many of us, we've kind of lost that connection to our body. We're used to just like deflecting emotions or just letting it pass. You know, okay, I'm just not going to think about it. That's a good way, especially with TV as a distraction. That's a big thing. So areas within somatics would include like breath work. Some of you might have heard of polyvagal work, where you work on toning your vagus nerve. You do like body scans, meditation. That's all within the cloud of somatics. And then the fourth area is self-discovery work. So self-discovery work includes looking at your values and looking if you're living by your values, or are you living your purpose? And I know that sounds really cheesy, but for those of us with sensitive nervous systems, really, if you want to get better and you want your body to feel safe enough to get better, I honestly think we have to do what we love. And that was told to me really early in my illness by a naturopath. He was like, do you love your job? And I was like, no. He's like, you're not going to get better till you quit. And at the time I was like, yeah, right, you know, but ended up being true. I had to figure out what I was meant to do in order for my body to feel safe enough to recover. And then another area within self-discovery work is trauma work. I actually just interviewed Alex Howard the other day, and we were talking about how trauma work means a lot of different things. It includes things like looking at personality type and why we do what we do. So there's really different levels of trauma work. You might be a person who's like, I don't need trauma work. I had a great childhood. Or I'm a privileged white person like myself, and you don't think that that's a factor. But there's really different levels of trauma. You might have heard of small t trauma and big T traumas. But it's really interesting what we can find when we try to dig into why our nervous systems are dysregulated. So all of that to say that I really needed all 4 areas in order to recover. I really needed to concentrate on routine. I needed to teach myself. I was a person who could follow a routine. Some people are more the opposite. They're perfectionists, and they need to teach themselves they can let go. So it can go either way. For a while, I needed diet for sure to be a huge part of it, especially when I had candida and SIBO and all that. But now it's like loosening up and letting myself eat what I can again, which is everything, thankfully. And then I did brain retraining, as I said, and then crashed. So you might think that I was saying that, oh, brain retraining doesn't work. But this past year, I got a dog, which was a huge part of my recovery as well. But she ended up having way more energy than I expected. I got a dog, adopted her thinking she was 8 or 9. And I got her and I was like, holy crap, this dog has a lot of energy. And when I took her to the vet, they were like, oh no, she's 2 or 3. Like, so they very much misguided me on that. So I knew I had to get better quick, because at that point I could maybe walk an hour a day. And she needed more than that, just on a daily basis. And so I wasn't even including all my other things I do in the day. So I knew I needed to get back to brain retraining. I knew it could work, but this time I was doing it differently. You know, I was doing it very strictly, but with a specific goal. And I didn't feel like, it's hard to explain, like a negative pressure. If you have something that's pressuring you, that's stressful, it might not work. But if you have something that you love and you're passionate about, that's motivating you, I think that's actually a lot more productive with brain retraining. So I did end up getting back to brain retraining, and it really helped a lot. And then with somatics and trauma work, that's been a huge part of my last few years, looking into those areas. And yeah, you won't believe what you can find when you look deep into what you need and why you are the way you are. There's a lot there.
I think this is pure gold. You were explaining this so well. I feel like you've summarized my last 50 interviews that I've done with people just really concisely. It's really in line with what I'm hearing from virtually everybody, but you just explained it in a way that just makes it so much easier to wrap your head around the different pieces of it. Because I've been seeing similar themes myself when I interview people, and it's just so nice that I really feel like we're finally starting to put this all together. I'm not saying we have all the answers or a one-size-fits-all program, but we have made, in the last 5 years, in the last 2 years, such incredible progress in terms of recovery. So it's just so nice that there is so much hope and potential and possibility now for people who are sick now.
Absolutely. And when it comes to programs, it's so interesting, because you'd think the best thing is to get a program that teaches all of this, right, in one place.
Yeah.
But the thing is, it can be really overwhelming. You're not necessarily ready for it all at once. Like, I wouldn't have been ready for trauma work earlier in my illness. First of all, my nervous system was like way too activated. I never recommend someone starts with trauma work. Later in my illness, when I had already done a lot of nervous system healing, then I was ready to come to that aspect. And for some people, like, a brain retraining is enough to heal them. So maybe they had already explored those other areas throughout their life in other ways, or maybe they don't need it as much as other people. So that's why it's such an interesting puzzle for every person. It's not just like, you can't be like, follow these steps, do these 4 things, and you'll be better. It's like, it has to be at the right time. You have to be ready for it. There's all these elements that have to be right in the right place, which makes it very frustrating, but it's 100% doable.
And that, which I say a lot, is great that we have so many options out there. And I love your point about, doing it in the right order or not necessarily doing it all at once. But it can be very overwhelming. Yeah. Because there are so many options out there now, and a lot of them are expensive. And most people facing illness don't have a lot of money because mostly of the illness. It robs you of that as well. Incredibly infuriating. So in your experience of reviewing all these programs, what have you found, and what do you have available for people to help them to figure out what would be the best program for them, or what might be?
So, well, one thing is the programs guide, because that lets you go through the different programs yourself. And I do think there's only so much I can do for a person. Like, I work one-on-one as a programs navigator, so you can obviously set up a call with me, but there's only like to a point I can help someone, because there does have to be a part of your gut feeling, which I know is kind of like woo-woo to be like, trust your gut. But in terms of what you're ready for and what you're feeling is right, it is really you in the end who's making the decision. You have to be in the seat, the driving your own canoe, whatever metaphor you want to use. But what I do in my appointments, I go through 10 different categories. You can see them on my website, lindsayvine.com. The different categories we go through, and it's really like a science experiment or like solving a puzzle, figuring out like which factors are you missing. And even if you have tried different modalities in the past, why didn't they work for you? That's always really interesting, figuring out that. Like, there's a lot of little factors that can add up to figuring out what's the right path for you. And it's not necessarily a program. I definitely am not against drugs. One of my interviews coming up is with Dr. Jacob Teitelbaum, and he's very much on the doctor-y side of things. He's not against programs, for sure, but he has a lot of medical interventions that he suggests to people. And I think a combo can be really good. So I'm happy to help people too with suggesting, maybe read Dr. Teitelbaum's book as well, if it seems like that might be a factor for them. But in terms of your original question, it's kind of helping people figure out what factors they want in a program, what they need in a program, and then connecting them to the programs that match that. And if for them it's not a program, some people have straight up said to me, like, I just don't have the capacity right now to do a program, or just I'm over trauma worked out, So you get into these stages. There's definitely other ways we can go and explore different modalities that could help you as well.
And you mentioned the CFS Recovery Programs Guide. So tell us about that.
Okay, so me and the wonderful Liz Carlson, who I know you're friends with as well. She's Heal with Liz on YouTube and on Instagram. This was about 7 or 8 months ago. We had been chatting about our goals, and it turned out we had a very similar goal for what we wanted to do. We wanted to make the information about these different programs more accessible to people in one place. And we ended up deciding that together we would create this programs guide. She had done a few programs in the past, like Primal Trust, and she's done ANS Rewire and DNRS. And I've done a few programs as well, so we could combine that information of our personal experience. But then we also decided to interview people who'd done other programs and collect information on all different kinds of programs that are out there. In the course of that, we ended up finding there's over 25 programs out there. There's a lot of programs online trying to help people with CFS, ME/CFS. Long COVID and all these other disorders that are system sensitivity disorders. But we ended up putting together our heads, and we interviewed program creators and past participants. A lot of the creators also gave us access to their programs, which has been really nice, so we could go through them ourselves. And then what we did with the guide, it ended up just growing and growing and growing over time, because there's so much we wanted to include. On top of like the descriptions and the price and the duration of programs, we included things like what to keep in mind if you're starting a program, what it doesn't include, because sometimes you're not sure what it includes and what it doesn't include. We also said what sets it apart from other programs out there, and who would this be good for and who would it not be for. So those are some of the categories we cover for each program in the guide. We also did some frequently asked questions about brain retraining, because that's something that comes up a lot. People have so many questions about that. We added some prompts at the end that might help you decide on what program's right for you. Yeah, we have a lot of information in there. So it took us a long time to do, and I hope people really get a lot out of it.
This is so needed, and it's such a great guide. And I've worked with Liz on things before. She is very thorough, so I have no doubt that you guys have covered all of the bases here.
Yeah.
100 times over, making sure that they will truly be helpful for people. So yeah, really, really a great resource. All of this, everything that Lindsay has mentioned is listed in the video description. So I highly recommend that you take a moment to expand that and check it out. Her podcast, all the different things, the recovery guide, her website, and so forth will all be there. And if you are enjoying this video, I'll link in a couple seconds here somewhere on the screen a really kind of fun and wacky interview that I did with Liz when our friend Pamela Rose was visiting from the UK, who's also a CFS recovery kind of person. Had a lot of fun sharing what our biggest insights kind of were about recovery. But yeah, thank you so much, Lindsay. This really has been so valuable. I think you are amazing. Your story is so powerful. The work you are doing is so needed and so vital. So yeah, just thank you. Thank you for your time and just for everything that you're doing.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Raelan. You've done an incredible job getting people's stories out there, and you've been such an inspiration to me in my journey. So I really appreciate you as well.
I love this whole community that we've built. To all of you watching, I've started calling us health stars because we really are. I've never met a more informed bunch of people in my life, and how we've come together and are pulling each other out of this, I think is just, it's really, how many times can I say incredible? It's
incredible. Yeah, and for anybody who's like, feels like they've tried everything, like, there's just so many things that are out there to try, and science is also advancing in the process. So never give up. It's really amazing what can happen.
Absolutely. Well, thank you again, Lindsay. Thank you to you who is watching. Whatever you are facing, keep at it. You have totally got this. And I hope you enjoyed this video as much as I have enjoyed doing it. I hope you got something out of it, and I hope to see you in this next one with Liz that I'll link here.